What's up? Y'all? It's your boy Woods for another very, very important podcast right now. You know, today makes it so important to me because I have two very important teachers in my community that are fighting for the rights of my kids, your kids, all of our kids. And their voice is very important because sometimes we don't hear from our school teachers, you know? Sometimes we have an opinion, but not all the time do we know what they go through, their perspective, how they look at things. So with that being said, I'm going to use my platform this time to do something for my community. You know, it's kind of selfless this time. It's not just about Devin. I care about what's going on with this COVID-19. It's been pretty tough lately with this COVID-19 with my family. Kind of hit my family pretty tough recently. And it's kind of through the gathering. So there's a lot that's going to happen when kids go back to school. Should we go back to school? Some of the questions I'm going to ask them because, you know, a lot of people gathered. Not everybody was safe when they gathered. Should we be going back right now? So with that being said, I have two guests. Brian Westlake, he's a very important guest because he is part of one of the first teachers union that is already formed, but there's some things they got to get through to make it all the way official. You hear what I said? Teachers union in Georgia. It's something that we desperately need. A voice. I also have Rachel Ash on. She one of the best teachers in our community, also a very powerful voice. She comes speaking for the minorities. She speaks for the kids of in poverty. She has a very, very important voice. And with that being said, let me bring on my two guests, Mr. Brian Westlake and Ms. Rachel Ash.
Hi.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on my platform, Destined for Greatness. Thank you for agreeing to come on here and talk about some of the issues that are going on in our community.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, for sure. But first off, I want you guys, as people, to get to know you a little bit more. So I'm going to go into a clip first to let people know right now a little bit about why we're here. Mr. Will Banks is our superintendent. And some people love him, some people dislike him, each their own. But there's definitely a controversy at one period of time about comments that he made to this particular teacher. So without further ado, let me go into this clip so you guys can see a little bit about Mr. Will Banks.
Ms. Radloff, before the next speaker begins talking, there's something I feel that I need to say to Mr. Westlake. It also pertains to a couple of other people that have spoken tonight. My comments are in keeping with the opening statement you read at the beginning of tonight's meeting, that you read at the beginning of every meeting. A statement the chairman reads that says, in which you make reference to the need for courtesy and decorum in conducting effective public meetings. Mr. Westlake, you have addressed this Board of Education on at least 4 other occasions, previously 4 months. One can only describe your comments as 1, disrespectful, and 2, unprofessional. I believe it is fair to expect an employee, especially a teacher, to exhibit what is fair and acceptable behavior, language, and to exhibit some degree of civility and respect for the organization and its governing board that provides you with employment and a paycheck every month. If you are so unhappy with the Gwinnett County Public Schools, we could accept your resignation at any time, including now. For tonight's immediate purpose, be advised that the board and I will expect your comments to be delivered in a manner that is civil, respectful, and in keeping with the quorum that an occasion such as this deserves. If they are not, you will not be included on the list of speakers at any other board meeting until you can assure us that you can do that. Thank you.
Do you wish to speak, Mr. Westlake?
Now, I ask you, would you like to speak, Mr. Westlake?
Sure. Well, as far as I didn't expect that to happen, I was quite surprised by it. I don't think it was directed toward me personally, even though he singled me out by name. I think it was to send a message to anybody who is an employee of Gwinnett County Public Schools who wants to come before the elected board and express concerns about the way the schools are being run. And anybody who does that as a citizen. And what I found interesting about that is that the chair didn't address my comments. He said that my comments could only be described in one way, as disrespectful. There's a lot of people who appreciated my comments and didn't think they were disrespectful at all, but thought they were important critiques, and they were important because they were bringing things to the attention of the public that maybe they didn't know about the way County Public Schools is operating.
So what are some of the things that you said in your statement which made him reply like that? So what are some of the things that kind of got under his skin?
Well, he's correct in that I've been speaking for 4 months every month, and I had my goal was to perhaps bring to light some things that I thought the public at large, some people who hadn't been paying attention for years, as I have, some of the things that have been going on in Gwinnett County Public Schools. So a lot of people became really aware of the decisions that they were making, the board was making, because of COVID and because we're in the middle of a pandemic. Mm-hmm. But I think there's some questionable decisions that have been made for years by the board. And some of these I was trying to point out, things like the increase in the administrative ranks. So more administrators. We've been growing administrators for a decade. The percentage of personnel classified as administrators has increased every year consistently for a decade. And that means there's a zero-sum game. If the percentage of personnel classified as administrators is increasing, that means the percentage classified as support staff and teachers is decreasing. So that means class sizes are affected.
Lack of teacher representation in decision making.
Lack of teacher representation in decision making. Lack of parental input. I mean, I don't think parents would make that choice. I don't think most parents would say, I think I want more administrators running around or walking around the school building or in the central office rather than have my child having a smaller class size. I don't think most parents would make that decision, but those are the decisions that are being made. And I think people needed to be aware of that. And especially during a pandemic, a lot of those administrators have teaching credentials. So at a time when it's supposed to be all hands on deck, and at a time when we're supposed to be socially distancing, if you are going to make the choice to have children return to the building, which I question that choice.
I'm going to ask you that next.
Transmission rates are high. But if you are going to make that choice, why are you not lowering the class size by having all those administrators who have teaching credentials teach at least part of the day?
So how many students do you have in classroom, in person?
Well, it's gonna vary. So from my classes, I got to a high point of about 8. Our school, I teach in a high poverty, a Title I school, which it's high poverty. It's in an area, a very disadvantaged population of students we are serving. And I think because of the COVID trend, they were so concerned there's a lot of multi-generational family households I think a lot of our community has been very concerned about COVID, so they have not chosen to send their children back in as high of numbers as some of the other schools. So some of our classrooms are not quite as large as they might be in another school, but still, my classes personally have gotten up to about 8. But I have some colleagues that have gotten up to 16, 17, 18, and at 8, I couldn't socially distance my kids, and I have a fairly large classroom. But if you're talking about 6 feet from everyone you're in the classroom with, it gets very hard when you get above 6 people in a classroom.
Okay, so this question is for Rachel. How do you feel about students being in person during the pandemic right now? Do you feel that it should be totally digital, or do you think that being in person is fine?
So this is something that we've actually been talking about a lot, and my real feelings are this. We didn't think outside the box at all. We being Gwinnett County did not think outside the box at all. They only thought of, you can either be in the classroom or you can be at home. I would like to see us do digital classes with the option for certain kids who have really specific needs and the teachers who are willing to come. And there are some teachers who are willing to come and deal with those kids in person. Those teachers can come and work with those kids. But everybody else should be at home that can be at home. And this is for safety. Everybody should be at home that can be at home in general. It's not safe. The numbers have actually gotten worse. A few days ago, it was over 10,000 positive COVID cases in Georgia. Gwinnett County itself, I just checked 2 days ago, was at over 18% positive for COVID cases. Positivity count means the percentage of cases that come out positive in the testing. We are not in a good position to be going to school right now. And yet we're looking at more students signed up for in-person classes than we had in the first half of the school year. And I've been taking all the positive cases that have been reported since the beginning of school. And at the end of the semester, we had almost 1,500 positive cases since the beginning of the school year that have been reported.
Yeah,
Students and teachers.
That's what I was going to say, and teachers. So you've been kind of short-staffed in the news that's saying that our teachers are very short-staffed because if you're missing, then the substitutes, there are not a lot of substitutes. No. So my question is to you right now, since you say that we might not be safe to be in school, how was your classroom looking? What are some of the preventative measures that are being taken that the county gave you supplies-wise? And also just how does it look physically in the classroom?
My classes, here's what happens in my class. Brian, yours may be similar. My biggest class was 15. I separated them as far as I could. Not perfect. I had, and that's in person, obviously. My biggest class was 32 kids, but 15 in person. 32.
Okay.
15 in person, 32 kids, but they're in person and online simultaneously. So I'm trying to teach them in person and online. I set up a space for myself where I could sort of talk to my online kids and my in-person kids at the same time and project. And I do my best to try to shuffle that. My friends and I, we talk about this a lot, where we feel like we're failing both classes because there's no way to evenly split your attention and do a good job. I'm trying. I love my kids. I want them to get something quality from me. I've been teaching this is my 18th year teaching. I care passionately about what I do, but there is no way to be a good teacher and split your attention. So one side's always losing something.
So the question is,
I do use dual screens, sort of,
Okay.
in that I split. So I'm able to drag something over to my projector screen and then share that screen to my Zoom screen. And that's basically how I do that. And that way, at least they're seeing the same thing that I'm talking about at the same time. And then when I have independent work, I sort of release them and work with my in-person students independently and try to also pay attention to whether my Zoom students need me at the same time. But again, that's really hard to split my attention evenly between them. I also have it where they can text me if they need me. So,
Okay.
but
Okay,
that's
so
what I'm
Brian,
doing to balance it.
great, thank you so much. So Brian, question is, in your classroom, are you finding it easier? I mean, which students do you think are benefiting the most, the in-person or the digital students? Benefiting the most from the system?
Well, it really varies. It varies. Actually, some students have done well digitally, and some students are struggling in person. So sometimes it's counterintuitive. It really depends on the individual student. I don't think this situation is ideal for anybody, but we are in a pandemic, and so it's not going to be what it would be if we weren't in a pandemic. Where I think the county really failed is really it's about how we were doing prior to the pandemic. And my argument is that we weren't doing as well as the PR suggests we were doing prior to the pandemic. And that became abundantly clear once we were in a pandemic. And what I think should have happened, just like Rachel was saying, there are students that probably need some form of in-person instruction. It is going to be very hard for them to manage totally digitally. But the thing is, we could have created a solution if we worked together. And if we had parents, teachers, administrators at the table crafting solutions, right? It wasn't going to be what we had prior to the pandemic, because we have to understand we are in a pandemic. But we could have come up with solutions together that would have been better than what we end up with. And that's because you have a small group of people who are making these decisions for everybody with very little in the way of input. And all you have to do is go back to what happened with performance pay. Performance pay was a disaster. And that hit, or all the bad media about it hit in December.
Can you explain that to some people that might not know what you mean by that? Performance pay?
So the county came up with a plan that took several years to roll out that was never popular among teachers, which is what the county said. And when I say the county, I mean the administration and the central office. Basically, what the administration said it was doing, it was creating a plan to reward the best teachers. But I haven't spoken to a teacher yet who thought it was a good plan. And if you look at the steering committee that came up with the plan, there were 23 people who provided input in the plan, and 17 of them work at the central office. Only 3 of them are principals, and 3 of them are teachers. And I know one of the teachers is married to somebody at the central office. I'm not sure if that had anything to do with them being on the steering committee. But even principals, because I don't think it was particularly popular among building administrators either, because it was very divisive. And I don't think principals generally want to divide their faculty in some kind of bonus structure. So if they wanted to do something to reward teachers, the first thing you need to do is include more teachers in the process.
In the decision making, correct.
Right. But this is just one example of the way Gwinnett County Public Schools makes decisions.
And the plan itself is, just for people who don't know, is that based on your evaluations and the testing of your students and stuff like that, the very top tier teachers in different settings would get bonuses, pay bonuses.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that teaching really is a collaborative profession. It really needs to be. We need to help each other. We need to be supporting each other. If something works, I should share it with all the other teachers.
Correct.
But now I have a really good reason not to, because then they might
makes it competitive.
It makes it competitive. Right. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden, something that should be collaborative becomes competitive. It's really counterproductive in our profession to make us be competitive with each other.
Yeah.
So my question is, go ahead. Go ahead, Brian.
Another concern, which was brought up prior to the rollout, was the way this was structured was going to create a disadvantage for Title I schools, or the schools serving the neediest of children in our community. And that's exactly what happened. So people predicted this would create a disincentive for people to go to those schools. And that's exactly what happened. People at those schools got a disproportionately lower number of bonuses. So, and the reason why I bring that up is because there's this perception out there that everything was doing well until the pandemic. And then, who could have anticipated this? Well, it's not that everything was going well prior to the pandemic. It's our response to the pandemic is directly connected to the way things have been run before, which was not very good.
He actually said that. Will Banks actually said that in his statement for all the times that you've been here saying what you've said. He actually said it out of his own mouth that this is not something new. This is something that has been going on forever. It's just that the pandemic might have brought more light on it because people had more time to pay attention to it. And things are also different right now. So when things are different, now everybody's more of alert. Mm-hmm. So another question that I have is, being that you said you are kind of in a Title I school, for those that that's kind of a lower income. Do you think that that is fair when it comes down to how the testing is for those students?
No, I don't think a focus on standardized tests is good for any student, whether they're Title I or non-Title I. I don't think focusing so much on standardized tests, the only use of standardized tests, based on what I've read in terms of the literature, should be diagnostic. It should give the educator some additional information to help. It doesn't mean you're going to base everything you do on that test, but it tries to help you serve the students. It's similar to if you go to the doctor's office, right? If the doctor orders a test, it's to give the doctor a little bit more information to try to help diagnose and then treat to improve your health, right?
Well, and they're actually, standardized tests are made specifically so that they spread out scores. So they're really made in order to fail certain students. So they are designed with that purpose, to make sure that scores spread out. They're not made with student success in mind. If you study things written by people who design standardized tests, it's really fascinating and also lets you know how flawed the whole system is. It's bad. I'm actually quite radical, I guess, probably in the way I view standardized testing.
I want to hear it. That's what we're here for. We're here for you to go ahead, let it out. We're here. Let's talk about it.
The people who design standardized testing, when you get into the real begats of it, a lot of the the writing on it tends to be based on the bell curve, and it's about spreading out the test scores, and they don't care what they have to use to do that. And a lot of times that means that some of the writing is based on socioeconomic things that will spread out test scores, or racial things. And it's literally can be racist, and it literally can be classist. And
in what fashions do you mean by that?
okay, so what was one of the examples that they gave that was interesting? There was a lot of times it's terminology that would be really well known to, say, someone who grew up in a white suburban neighborhood, but might not be to somebody who didn't grow up in that setting. And so they know that terminology isn't a real test of someone's knowledge of, say, that scientific concept, but it will help still separate the test scores. Because if everybody knows that something falls because of gravity, then everybody gets an A, and that doesn't help us separate scores. But if not everybody knows that Granny Smith apples are normally green, then we can separate the scores out just a little bit more.
Makes it unfair. They're at a disadvantage.
Yeah. So they don't actually test on the most common knowledge.
There is a dark history
and it's still
involved in standardized testing, right? That is tied to eugenics. It's tied to some, white supremacy, racism, classism. So there is a dark history. I do believe it is possible to use standardized tests in a way that gives you information. You have to be very careful in the way it's used, but I think you can use standardized tests diagnostically, but it has to be, it can't have any weight attached to the educator's pay, or it can't have, or the ability for a student to pass on to the next grade or anything like that. And that's where it becomes problematic, is when people are trying to rank people rather than say, well, and somebody just mentioned it stresses students out. It makes learning not the kind of exciting endeavor that it should be, right? And all those people up there for the school board, all those people we elected to run the schools, with the exception of probably Everton Blair, every single one of them went through their entire career without ever taking a standardized test.
Are you serious?
Probably.
And they're the ones that's mandating it? They're mandating it, and they haven't even took them themselves?
When I first started teaching 18 years ago, the alternative evaluation was the key word, and it was a beautiful thing. And the idea was find other ways to find out what your kids know. And it wasn't until No Child Left Behind became the thing, and that was like directly after that.
I'm glad you spoke on that.
Yeah, and that's what started the whole testing culture thing. But when I first started teaching, they were going, let's find other ways to find out what kids know besides testing. And it was great because it was so inclusive. It had ways for kids who had learning differences and disabilities. You could find other ways for them to show you what they understood that was best for their personal strengths. And I would love a return to that.
So question is, with the No Child Left Behind, kind of, do you feel like there's some students, I'm going to say it just kind of bluntly, do you think that there's some students that just being passed along without actually being qualified for the next class? Like, you think that they're kind of just kind of setting them up for disappointment? Because I know some personal students. I'm a basketball coach out here, and I know I get to look at some of their reports. I'm like, how are you passing? Like, how is this acceptable? Do you think that our standards are too low?
So,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Ray.
Well, I was just going to say that's teacher to teacher. I know that people sometimes question how certain students pass my class. but I know that it's because I sit on them. I will not allow a kid to fail my class because if they are failing my class. Now, this year has not been the same because pandemic has made it a lot harder for me to have access to students. But when they are physically in my classroom, I will sit beside a student and be like, you will do this assignment right now with me sitting beside you. Okay, you did that one. Great. Now do this one.
Well, with the pandemic, can you do that with the pandemic?
No, I've had to fail some students and I hate it.
Yeah. So, what are your relationships with students and parents now, with the new changes that have made? What are some of the complaints that the parents are having?
I'm sure, Brian, you have the same experience. There's a lot of frustration over trying to get their kids to do some of the work. I know that I've had kids return to my classes who aren't working at home. But some of those kids still don't work even in my class.
Yeah.
Unless I sit on them.
Have you found is kind of the same students that whether they were digital or in person, they kind of have the same results?
The ones that are struggling to work are usually the same ones that are struggling to work in person. I mean, they're not motivated. I've wondered last year at the end of the year, there was a little bit of the whole, well, let's just sort of give them a bye. And I've wondered if they were expecting that to happen at the end of the semester too.
They probably were.
Yeah.
Parents as well.
Yeah. But
I do think also there's not enough focus. I mean, obviously individual teachers and building administrators try to address this, but there's not enough focus, in my opinion, coming from the county as a whole on social and emotional health right now. I mean, these kids are dealing with a lot. We're dealing with a lot as adults.
I was going to ask you that too. The students are dealing with a lot.
Right. And I don't think the focus should not be about tests. The focus right now should be just helping each other to get through this difficult time. And we as educators, our job anytime is to help young people to grow and into thoughtful, compassionate, caring, responsible adults. And we don't do that by ourselves. We do that in coalition with the parents. But what we've done in Gwinnett County under I'm hopeful of the new school board, but under the past school board, is what we've done is we've had a very select group of adults make all those decisions, really without a lot of input from the educators who are day-to-day spending time with students as children, not as data points on a spreadsheet, or a lot of input from parents, or a lot of input from students. I mean, there were students last year before the school board meetings were streamed live. I was there in person and watched students from Parkview, many students, get up and speak to their concerns about testing, some of the very concerns that we've brought up here. And unfortunately, you can't go back and watch those because they weren't streamed back then and they weren't archived. And that's another one of the things that I spoke to over the last 4 months is this lack of transparency. And there's, in my opinion, there's a reason why there's been this lack of transparency, is because power has been allowed to be concentrated in the hands of fewer and fewer adults at the expense of children and most of the adults in the community. And now people are becoming aware of that. And that's what needs to change. In order for us to have better schools in the future, and in order for us to do the best we can for our children during this pandemic, we need that approach to change. We need more openness, more inclusion, and more transparency. And we need to work together. And if we work together, I'm confident that we can do the best by our children, even during this pandemic. It won't be perfect. It never will be perfect, but it will be much, much better.
Well, and that was the biggest thing about that. It's what I consider an attack by Mr. Wilbanks, is that we've come up and over the message has been, we want change and we want to make Gwinnett better. We're not saying, down with Gwinnett. We're saying, here's the things that we want so that we can make this better. Yeah, so that we can make this a better place for everybody.
All right, so my question, so right now I want to bring up the union that is formed that you are working with, the Gwinnett County Association of Educators, right? Can you explain, because it's a great segue, because you're speaking of the community coming together with the teachers and also the students. Even they have a voice here and there, and they are the ones that's learning, so their voice matters. So what are some of the things that your association is providing and some of your plans in the near future?
Well, the first plan is, of course, to grow membership in the local and to help educate teachers, because that's one of the things we have to do, is educate our colleagues that there is a different model, right? Because many of many of my colleagues have only taught in Gwinnett or have only taught in this kind of approach. But it doesn't have to be this way. And you don't have to go to places like Finland to find schools where teachers are empowered and people who spend their day every day with their time every day with children actually have a seat at the table in making decisions, right? And parents are invited in to help make decisions. So there is a better way. So we want to grow membership. We also want people to realize that unions are not illegal. So you have a constitutionally protected right to belong to a union, including in Georgia, right? So
they think that. No, most people think in Georgia you can't have a union.
So you can have a union. It's just we don't have some of the things that they might have in a place like Michigan or other place because they fought. It's not that these laws that make it easier, for example, like laws supporting collective bargaining, where the union together with the administration will negotiate a contract. That doesn't exist in Georgia, but it doesn't exist not because it can't. It doesn't exist because we haven't changed the law. And unions, strong unions, don't fall from the sky. They're built by people working together in solidarity and with courage to change the working conditions. And the working conditions of the employees, of the teachers, of the bus drivers, of the cafeteria workers, of the paraprofessionals in those schools are the learning conditions of our children. And when we better those working conditions, we better the learning conditions of the children. And we can do it if we come together, but it's going to take courage and solidarity. And we'll do it the same way they did it up north, the same way they did it out west. Is they worked hard and they built strong unions, just like we can do here.
I'm very proud of you for what you're doing. Applause to you for being so strong and diligent and aggressive. And you're not afraid of the board. And that's one reason why I wanted you on here, because you're destined for greatness, my brother. That's why we have you on here. So I definitely also want to. How can people be a part of?
I'm going to have you tell my wife that.
Oh no, I will. Where's she at? I just seen her. She was here a minute ago. So yes. So how can people be a part of your membership? How can they be a part of the association? Where do they go? How can they actually, if they want to be a part, how can they do that?
So if they go to join GAE, if they just Google join GAE, then they can join our organization. It'll take them to a link where it'll start with the NEA, because we're a local affiliate of the National Education Association. And then GAE, the Georgia Association of Educators, is the state affiliate. And then we're the local affiliate. So if they go to join GAE, that'll take them to the NEA, and then they'll choose Georgia, and then they'll put in their information, and then they will become a member of GCAE, which is the Gwinnett County Association of Educators. So actually, the NEA, the national organization, is the largest union in the country. We have over 3 million members. So we're still working on growing membership in Georgia, but we're going to get there, and and there's a lot of people coming from other states who are used to being members and used to having a strong union and know what it's like and know the difference and know how much more support they feel when they're serving the children in a state that has a strong union.
Correct.
So we need their help in building it. So
that's why I brought you on, and that's why I brought you on here to get that word out to people that might not know how. So this question right here is for Rachel. So, being in our school district, our minorities are our majorities, basically. Our minorities are our majorities. So we have more brown and black students than we do right? So with that being said, why do you think there's such an imbalance in the education system? With that being said, there's not more catering to that particular. You understand what I'm saying? So if there's more brown and black people, why are they not learning things that's more conducive to how they learn?
Well, I think that can easily go back to our leadership. Our leadership is good old boy white. They've done it that way however long they've done it, and we're hoping to change that. We're hoping the new board leadership will help change that. We're hoping to bring in new training to help change that. I'm hoping the change in leadership will help change it, and I'm hoping that as we come in and suggest changes ourselves within we've got a group that is fighting the Gwinnett Educators for Equity and Justice. We are sort of fighting for representation within the system and change with equity within our system. And I get overwhelmed with like everything that needs to change. But there's so much needs to change. We need to change our discipline system. We need to change the education itself, the way history is represented. We need to change the way our different curriculums are designed. I know that they have worked with Dr. Welsh to create a new program for culture education. But that's just one small piece of it. But yeah, there's so much that needs to change. But I think it really just boils down to our leadership has been a board of white people that, to be honest, are old white people who
I was trying to hold it back, but you said it one more time. Right? You said it one more time. I had to have.
But it's true. I mean, and they have no knowledge. I mean, I'm going to quote something that was in an Educator Weekly. There was an interview with Dr. Murphy on one of those magazines where they asked her about the fact that the gifted program is very viewed white. And she said, I don't see why that needs to change. We don't need to meet a quota. Well, it needs to change because we test people into the program. So obviously children are not being tested into the program.
So my question is there an imbalance between the gifted program of being majority of white and the special ed of students being majority minorities?
Well, I haven't actually looked into the special education one. I just happened to see that particular statistic and that particular quote. But that's a good question to be checked into. I do know that discipline-wise, there is an imbalance, that a greater percentage of minority students, sorry, I'm reading the quote. We see we've changed the country, society has changed, and so we cannot fall back on what we've always done. Yeah, no, we have to change. I know that discipline-wise, the majority of there's a greater percentage of minority students who get disciplined than there is a percentage of white students that get disciplined. And I know that there's a greater percentage of students with disabilities that get disciplined than there are a percentage of students without disabilities that get disciplined. So that's something that we also should be looking at. I also know that there was a committee on discipline that they put out 40 recommendations, although there were no teachers on that committee, and none of the recommendations were adopted.
All right. So this question right here is for Brian. What advice can you give to parents and teachers in areas that do not have funding for digital platforms such as GCPS does? I have friends in Michigan who are overwhelmed by the struggles they are facing with their students.
Well, get involved. Get involved with the politics locally. Make sure the school board knows what you want and how you want to see the schools move in a different direction. Local elections matter. I think that's what Americans everywhere are finding out now. Local elections matter a lot. And a lot of the things that go on that affect our lives every day are local decisions.
How was our board even selected?
Right, through elections. There's it's a 5-member board, and that's another thing. I mean, it could be a larger board if people think that's important. I mean, the city of Atlanta, with a budget of $750 to $800 million a year, has a city council with 16 members on it. And our school district has 5 members and a budget of over $2 billion. So, maybe that's something that needs to be considered. So, local elections are the vehicle by which people in that community can shape their community and help their local government to serve the people in that community. And I believe that you asked the question earlier about education and the purpose and the minority district. And I believe, unfortunately, and this goes on not just in Georgia or Gwinnett County, but in the United States in general, we have attached public schools and the perception of quality of public schools to the value of real estate. And unfortunately, what that has done time and time again is it has created a predominantly white privilege associated with wealthy white people. Not all white people, but wealthy white people. And I think people in Gwinnett County, some people in Gwinnett County, have wanted to continue to portray Gwinnett County Public Schools in a way that there's this narrative that they're always doing great. And it's not really because they're that concerned about how well the students are doing or how well the schools are really serving the community. It's about the schools being this brand for Gwinnett, or helping to shape this brand, this narrative, in order to attract business to Gwinnett County. So it's used as a tool. It's a vehicle to attract business. And then as the businesses and more people are attracted to Gwinnett County, then it creates this premium, right? And it causes all the housing values to increase. But of course, where they're going to increase the most are certain parts of the county, right? Correct. So what I believe as an educator, and I think Rachel would agree with this, is really the purpose of education. I'm not in the business of creating additional home value for somebody in Gwinnett County. I became an educator to help young people, to provide them with the tools so they could find their passions and help discover their dreams and help those dreams become more of a reality for them, to really empower young people. And our schools, right, exactly. And if our schools are serving a predominantly minority population, and a disadvantaged minority population in many cases, it should be about empowering those people so they can change their futures, so they can change the futures of the people, their family members and their friends and their community, so they can serve their community. And it's all about empowering people.
Correct.
And
that's what this is all about.
And that's why I was so adamant about the need for a change on the school board. And I'm hopeful that with the new school board, I think there's at least a majority of them on that school board who understand that. And that's what we need to be about. It's not going to happen, though, if we don't stay engaged.
So right now, I want to go into a clip of on August 20th, of November 19th. Is that you? What date did you, there's two that you have. Which one would you like for me to go to, Rachel? I want to go into a clip that you had so we can talk about a little bit about the things that happened at your board meeting. I have the one from August 20th. Would you like for me to play that one?
Whichever one you want. If there's one that spoke to you more.
That one right there did. That's the one that got my attention and made me want to reach out to you. So without further ado, I'm going to go into your conversation that you had with the board.
Thank you for hearing me. My son is a Gwinnett senior this year, and he has worked very hard to create his perfect senior year. Starting in his freshman year, he has taken extra classes so that he could create a schedule with room for 2 musical courses, Latin 4, and an environmental engineering course that he has been excited about since January. Seeing his senior year ruined is enraging. My son has repeatedly made hard choices to arrive here. You've made choices to arrive here too. Some have made me proud, such as the bus-based food distribution program, and some have shamed me. Throughout the entirety of the summer, you chose not to address the county's virtual infrastructure so we could teach digitally with success. You chose not to purchase enough Chromebooks for students without home devices to provide equal access to digital learning. You chose to sit and hope that instead of increasing, the cases of COVID would decline and you could simply open the schools. You chose inaction. And you chose to justify your inaction with 2-month-old surveys, outdated research, health advice from an OBGYN, bully tactics, and an increasingly incredulous obliviousness of the experiments already running in Paulding and Cherokee County. By opening schools, you are making a new choice, a choice to ignore the current science, a choice to ignore the CDC's recommendations for not even the best case scenario as it is worded in your own reopening plan, but the bare minimum for safely reopening. A choice to put teachers and their families at risk. A choice to put bus drivers and school staff at risk. But most importantly, and the reason I cannot comprehend how you can claim to care about the well-being of the students you govern, this is a choice to put children at risk. A choice that will result in child illness. Yes, there is risk in everything, but there is a difference in driving a car with the knowledge I might someday be in an accident and driving a car knowing today is the day. Statistics are clean. They are faceless. But know that in this room are people who have lost family members to COVID-19. Look at our faces and tell us you choose us as your sacrifice. You choose our families. You choose our children. My son's senior year should have been his best, but I choose his life over his convenience and momentary happiness. I choose people over politics, and my hope is that you can do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right. That was powerful.
Yeah.
So my question to you with that, right? What were you thinking when you were writing that, and what made you go in with so much passion?
I That was right after they had said we were starting distant, and then they switched us. So they seemed to have listened to us and to have listened to our needs. And then they switched us to in person. And, originally I had been kind of pro hybrid concept. And then I realized that we were putting kids at risk. And then this is callous when it comes to the adults. And I care about the adults, but I care about the children the most. And the thought that I could lose a kid is just like killer. I've lost 2 students as a
You
teacher.
have?
I have.
You've actually lost 2 students to COVID-19?
Not to COVID.
Oh,
just in
okay.
general.
Okay.
So going into this year with the thought, the bait and switch was killer. Going into the year with the thought that I could lose kids, it was just, I cried for weeks when I lost my students in the past.
So do you
It's
still
so
feel the
hard.
same way? Do you still feel the same way? Those statements still stick with you, resonate with you today from before when school started to
Yeah.
the middle halfway point where you are right now?
I'm still angry. Yeah, I get calmed down every so often, and then I get angry again. Because I feel like the whole time it's been a pure callousness towards us and our needs, and there's no care about what's going on with us. When we've said, hey, we're not dealing well, the attitude's been like, well, you have like 2 counselor fees paid. You can see a doctor twice if you're having mental problems.
Wow.
That was the response. When we've said, we're overwhelmed and we're exhausted and we can't keep doing this, the attitude has been like, well, then that's just too bad. Um, we have been kind of the castaway in this whole situation. There has been no concern for our needs, and the bus drivers who are picking up kids with COVID, there's been no concern for that. And the cafeteria workers who have been, having to serve people when they don't know what's going to happen to them. I have a really wonderful man who cleans my room, and he got special permission to come in late so he can have a little more space between him and the people that are in the building physically, because his wife's on oxygen.
Wow.
Like, it's so unfeeling towards all the people who don't need to be going through this. And the attitude every time we bring it up is, well, don't you even care about the children? Well, of course we do. Of course we do. But does that mean that we have to not care about everything else too?
Correct.
And I don't know. I get, like I said, I do get angry, and I get angry that their main source of information, it literally was, she was an OBGYN, and she came up and she gave us incorrect facts, because I have kept up on, and I know Brian has as well, and several of us have actually kept up on the most current information on COVID as it's come out, and she kept up with what was the most convenient information on COVID. And things, that stuff is just, it's angering. Yeah.
It's so disheartening. It's so Brian, what are your feelings about everything? Or do you have an anger feeling towards kind of what's happening? Do you share the same feelings, Rachel, or do you have a different emotion?
Well, I do get angry. I do believe, though, that what we're experiencing, it's because of the inequality that exists in our society. And just people are, I think privilege is a good word. People have the privilege of, there's people who can work from home at times like this and still earn a decent living, and in some cases do quite well during the pandemic. There are people who are buying homes right now, and because they're doing well, while other people are at risk of losing their home. And there's people who are essential workers, who don't even make a livable wage. And I think this has been going on for a long time. And it's what the pandemic has done is it's in many ways, it's just kind of pulled back the curtain, and it's helped us to see more of what's going on, and maybe help some people who didn't notice it was going on to notice it. And now the question is, how do we go about addressing it? And I just think we've allowed way too much power and privilege to be concentrated in the hands of a few people. And what we know from the research is it can happen to any of us. If any of us get all this power and privilege, any of us can become callous toward others. Any of us, it's unfortunately, it's part of human nature. And that's why we need to create systems that prevent that accumulation of power, that don't allow one person or a few people to make a decision that could put thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people's lives at risk for some trivial reason. And yet we've done that. And now the question is, what are we going to do? What are we going to do to help change it? And we're going to have to, it's going to have to start with the courage to come together and speak to these issues, and then standing in solidarity. So I'm a teacher, I'm not a bus driver, but I know bus drivers are at the same risk I am. Exactly. And I need to be willing to use the privilege I have to get up there and speak to their risks, to speak to the risk of the paraprofessionals, to the cafeteria workers, to the custodians, because they're dealing, we all need to support each other.
It's a team effort.
Absolutely.
And the thing is I still feel like we could have come up with a better plan.
Absolutely.
If we'd all been at the table together instead of them just sitting. That was part of my anger, as it was in the speech. You just sat and waited. That's all you did.
And that's exactly what they did, because they didn't have a structure in place to create a better plan. And it's all about process. You have to have a process in place that brings everybody together, because you get more brains in the room and it's easier to find that out of the box solution. So
one of my last questions are, so what advice would you give to a state or a county that are not in person yet, but thinking about going in person? Like, what are some of the preparations or some of the things that you can prepare, like the teacher's mind frame, or some of even the students that are listening to actually going to in person, for those that have been only digital so to this point?
I sit down with a group of teachers and parents and come up with a plan that's not just, don't think binary, don't think there's only in person and digital. Think about what are some options that could really work for us as a county. What are the ways in which we can do this that could actually work for us as a group? You'd be surprised what people can come up with when they're working together as a community, instead of, the things that everybody's just looking at. I think that that's what they really need to do. There needs to be working together, and there needs to be community. They need to see what people, there might be people who are willing to volunteer time to offer, their own, maybe there's parents who are willing to offer time to come into a space that's outdoors and let, pods of students come together in particular settings. There's options that aren't just in school or out of school.
And you have to start with the science and the public health advice, the sound public health advice. And I remember there was something, I can't remember her name, unfortunately, but she was a former director for public health in Baltimore. And she said, you need to look at it like you have a risk budget, right?
Yes.
So if you're going to risk, the increasing transmission by opening the schools, then maybe as a community, you need to decide to keep the bars closed. Then maybe as a community, if you're going to open the schools for some in person, maybe not all in person, because you have a risk budget, right? Then maybe you're going to have to forego the extracurricular sports that this year, right? You're in a pandemic, so things will not look normal, right? But that's what we need to be thinking about. So, and we can find solutions together if we work together based on science and based on standing in solidarity.
Oh my God.
Clear thresholds also.
Absolutely.
Yes. Thank you so much for both of you coming on. Is there anything that you guys would like to, any message, any way to get a hold of you that I would like to share with all the fans right here that I can get a hold of you? Maybe like you said about the joining the association, or maybe you're following a group that you have. Give any information that you have right now.
I'm easy to find on Twitter. I'm at Rachel Kinnis, Cinis. It's just Latin for Ash because I'm a Latin teacher. So you can tweet me.
And then I'm easy to find on Facebook when I'm not in between houses. I'm actually on Facebook quite a bit, so you can reach out there, or you can always reach out using my email address. It's Brian Westlake, altogether, .gcae@gmail.com.
I definitely will put all of that in the comments. So thank you so much for everybody tuning in. We had an amazing, amazing group of people that were participating with great statements, great questions. Thank you for my wonderful guests that came on. You guys are doing amazing things and you're destined for greatness. So once again, Destined for Greatness podcast, y'all. We tuning out. Talk to y'all later.
All
right.
Thank you.